Well, good morning. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and it's great to have as our guest Mr. Bill Rounds. Bill's an attorney in California. He's also an accountant. He's the author of How to Vanish. He specializes in many important areas of the law, including privacy law. Bill, I want to talk to you about privacy, as I guess most people want to talk to you about privacy. Do we have any hope? I mean, we're living under a police state. It seems to be growing in scope and in power by the day as we watch it. Do we have any hope for privacy?
Well, it's certainly true that we are living in somewhat dark days with the way that the law has progressed and advanced in ways that have kind of destroyed our ability to maintain our autonomy and our individuality. And there's a lot of people who might think that, we're past the point of no return, and they're just kind of hunkering down and preparing themselves for maybe an East Germany-style dictatorship. But I'm a lot more optimistic than that. I do have hope for the future because I see a lot of developments out there that are actually very positive and very supportive of individual freedom, the ability of individuals to engage in perfectly legal activities that would otherwise not harm anybody else without the big brother watching over their shoulder or without their snoopy neighbor looking in and seeing what they're doing in their private lives. One of the things that I've heard described as is there is an arms race to develop privacy tools on the one hand, and by governments and hackers and maybe corporations as well, on the other hand, to invade our privacy, collect as much personal information as they possibly can about us. But some of the tools that I see coming out as being very positive are things like encryption. Encryption is becoming more and more easy to use. It's becoming more and more accessible for people who may not be very technologically savvy. If someone can use email, it's maybe one more step to be able to use some of these tools to encrypt email or encrypt your phone conversations or even to encrypt just your internet use. So I see that as one development. I also see on maybe the legal end of it, I start to see a lot more criticism of the so-called war on drugs or the prohibition, because that's one of the major vehicles by which our personal freedoms and our privacy has been invaded by the law over the past 50 or 60 years. So those are two definite areas where I see some hope on the horizon for us as individuals to protect our privacy.
I certainly remember back during the days of the Reagan administration when they sought to abolish financial privacy, again, in the name of the drug war. I mean, that's just one of many developments. On the other hand is the heroic Phil Zimmermann, the author of Pretty Good Privacy, PGP, has got an app coming out for the iPhone, and I'm sure for the Android too, that will sort of seamlessly and transparently enable you to encrypt your text and your email sent through your iPhone through PGP, which I gather they still have not been able to break.
The way that encryption technology works, it is much, much easier, takes less effort to encrypt your communications and encrypt your files than it does break that encryption. It takes a lot more energy, a lot more money, a lot more sophistication to break it. And since Phil Zimmermann put his neck on the line back in the 90s to take the sharing of encryption and encryption technology out of the realm of illegal things, he's really made it proliferate and made it easier and easier and easier for individuals to take advantage of that mathematical benefit that encryption technology provides.
When you talk about movements towards, or at least people thinking about getting rid of drug prohibition, are you talking about the nullification that's taking place in various states? Of course, California first, but Colorado and elsewhere, where the states are just saying we're going to allow people to use marijuana no matter what the feds say.
That's certainly part of it, but I feel it's just a broad understanding of the public that, look, these prohibitions against what someone does on their couch in the privacy of their own home, not affecting anybody else, is not worth going after. Maybe 7 or 8 years ago in so-called polite company, these kinds of things or ideas were not brought up, or at least not very often. But over the past couple of years, you see many, many states saying, you know what, we're not going to worry about this. It's not worth our time. Seeing states do that and some people being supportive of those kinds of movements, what I've seen is a change in public attitudes towards not just prohibition of maybe marijuana, which has been the subject of these most recent state actions, but even towards other things as well.
Economic historian Bob Higgs argues that the only reason, despite all the things that were wrong with alcohol prohibition, the only reason it was repealed was that was a tax people were anxious to pay at a time when, in a depression, when government was even more predatory and anxious for people's money than usual. Could that be part of it here too today, that people would gladly pay a tax to have these things in the open market where they can be sure of purity and cleanliness and sort of, that sort of thing, which you cannot sometimes be sure of in an underground market? Is the government's, at all levels, hunger for more money at this point, is that also helping?
It certainly is, because I think when people look at the lesser of two evils, they would say, okay, I would rather at least have access to this medicine or this recreation or whatever it is they want to do with it and pay a tax rather than be completely barred from using it. If it's more beneficial for all parties to have a tax on it rather than prohibit it completely, then certainly that's factoring into the equation. And what happens then is you have individuals who aren't hurting anybody, who have a pastime that maybe I don't agree with, but doesn't harm me or anybody else, and they're no longer criminalized, and so that activity is no longer criminalized. And so these people are not being, their rights, their freedom, their liberty is not being invaded and destroyed by governments or their neighbors even, because they participate in those activities. So I think that when the incentives on both sides line up towards liberty, which is what I see here, it's beneficial for all of us, and especially in terms of privacy and personal freedom.
Thanks to everybody who shops at Amazon.com. I wanted to mention that LRC gets a small commission at no cost to the buyer every time you go to Amazon through an LRC link, any of the widgets on the page for books or other items, or entering through the ad at the top left-hand corner of the front page. So thanks again, and it's a huge help. And Amazon, what a great company. It's just extraordinary. You don't need to go down to the local bricks and mortar place. You don't have to pay, in many cases anyway, sales taxes. So far as I can tell, virtually everything the human race produces is for sale at Amazon.com. So I highly recommend it. It helps keep LRC alive and growing. So thanks to all of you who shop at Amazon. Any other happy signs that you see on the horizon, and despite these dark days?
Oh, absolutely. I think that with some of these technologies that are coming out, like maybe 3D printing or some of the things I've already mentioned, like encryption, it's making the laws prohibiting people from using or having certain things pretty much irrelevant. Now, when you look at 3D printing and the ability to print off a firearm, which individuals have the inherent right to own and possess a firearm for fun, for recreation, or for personal protection, or for whatever. I know some people have thought that, we're marching down this road where all of the gun owners in the country are going to have to register their guns in some major database. I mean, it's only one or two steps more where those guns will be confiscated and will no longer be able to have them. With this technology like 3D printing, which is now at the point where we can pretty much start to manufacture a firearm in our own home for very, very little money without anybody else knowing that we're doing it, it's making those kind of registration laws kind of irrelevant. Now, I don't recommend that anyone violate the law. If there were some kind of a law that says, you're not permitted to print a firearm at your home, I would recommend changing the law before going out and breaking it, because as soon as you break the law, you're inviting kind of the weight of the state to come down upon you. But these technologies are making it pretty much irrelevant to have many of the laws that exist now and that they may try to pass.
Isn't it a wonderful sign that despite the unbelievable sort of Pravda-like media propaganda, and of course the full push by the state and all its allies otherwise, they weren't able to get these gun control measures passed? I mean, it shows that which many political philosophers have argued for many centuries, that government actually does depend on the consent of the governed, because there's such a small number of parasites as compared to the producers. And if the producers say no, they can actually prevent bad things from happening. So at least in this one case, so many Americans were so opposed to this, so intensely opposed, that they couldn't actually bring it about. at least for now.
Yeah, it's a very interesting sign and positive sign from what I see is that with the ability of individuals to share information over the internet in order to really become more informed and maybe better informed about the nature of things in the world, that when they try and do something that maybe overreaches, even though the mainstream media may be saying that, look, the public is overwhelmingly supporting these things, in reality, people may not be.
No, that's right. I know, talking about privacy, one of the things you think about and write about is, can we have any privacy in our email, and what we ought to avoid if we want to have any chance of privacy in our email. That's the sorts of things that we ought to avoid doing. You want to tell us about some of those?
Certainly. Now, with email, there are some legal protections, and it's actually an encouraging sign that there is some movement now to try and strengthen and increase those protections of your email. For the most part, email is very, very lightly protected. That is, it doesn't really require a lot of effort on the part of the government to read your emails. Now, the history of government actions have exposed many, many, many times where government has violated the law, either completely knowing that they're violating the law or accidentally violating the law. So I wouldn't necessarily rely on the laws to protect our communications like our email. So I know that Phil Zimmerman's new product, which is called Silent Circle, I believe that encrypted email is one of the things that he offers. There's also a service called Hushmail. Hushmail is also a service that can help protect and encrypt your emails. And both of these services are not much more difficult. There's not much more that you have to do in order to protect those emails than you would normally do with any other kind of email, like a Yahoo or a Gmail account. Now, there's even extra steps you can, if you're a little bit more technologically savvy, and use, PGP, which is what Phil Zimmerman originally created, or some other kind of encryption protocol for your own email. But those require a little bit more technological savvy, a little bit more time, a little bit more of a learning curve on those. But they're still widely available, and that's actually a free thing you can use.
What about, should we avoid, for example, Gmail?
Yeah, I would certainly avoid email for any kind of sensitive communication that you would not wear on a T-shirt out in public. In part because, and I think a lot of users are aware of it, but some may not be, that Gmail, the software is already scanning through your emails to provide targeted ads as you're reading your emails. So they're already archiving and databasing the information that's in your emails. It's already within the company's servers. It's already there to be searched. And a lot of times, the government agents will make a request for those emails and see what kind of information is in those emails. And especially when we have some kind of horrible incident happen in the country or around the world, that increases the scrutiny that certain people may have. Whether today it might be Muslims, a few years ago it might have been Americans of Japanese descent. Tomorrow, who knows what it's going to be that is going to trigger close scrutiny of you as an individual. So the less of that kind of information you can have floating around in your email to later be databased and then searched. Who knows if it's next year, who knows if it's in 10 years. But to be searched, the better.
Any other advice you have for just the regular guy who maybe is not so tech savvy?
Certainly. For the non-tech savvy people, one of the best things you can do is probably leave your cell phone at home every once in a while. Your cell phone is kind of like a constant tracker that is keeping track of all of your movements at all times. And all of that information is stored and archived. So if on occasion you have, let's say you're going to a Tea Party or Occupy Wall Street rally or a Ron Paul rally or something like that you think may be politically sensitive, maybe it may be embarrassing if your neighborhood or your neighbors knew that you participated in some of these things, you leave your cell phone at home. And that's a great way of kind of keeping some of that personal information to yourself. Another great thing to do is use cash for some of your purchases. Your credit card and debit card is keeping track of everything that you do. And as soon as you share your information with somebody else, you're at risk that other person is going to share it with the authorities or with anybody else. I think we all learned that lesson in third grade when we tell somebody a secret. Next thing we know, the entire third grade knows that secret. So using cash, you're not sharing that secret with anybody when you buy maybe a book or something that you don't want anybody else to know that you're reading that book. Another great thing to do is to use a separate legal entity for a lot of your dealings. So if you have a trust or an LLC to own property or to make purchases, that creates another layer of protection between you and your personal information and your purchases, the things that you purchase or the things that you own.
Well, Bill, thanks very much for coming on the show today, giving us this good advice. And we'll link, of course, to How to Vanish and to your website. And great to have you on. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the upper right-hand corner of the LRC front page. Thank you.